In a world where talent should speak for itself, what happens when some voices are deliberately silenced? At Millstone Middle School, Melanie Crow's cruel laughter echoed through the gymnasium as she pointed at Amara Ellison, the quiet black girl with the violin case. "This one's playing. Someone should tell her we need to hear it, not just see it." The audience laughed, uncomfortable but complicit. No one knew Amara was partially deaf. No one knew why she clutched that violin case like it contained her very soul. When Amara's violin strings are mysteriously cut before the graduation ceremony, an elderly blind luthier gives her another instrument, one with a history that will shake the foundations of Millstone's carefully constructed hierarchy. As Amara prepares to perform, a decades-old secret begins to unravel, threatening a respected teacher's career and revealing a pattern of discrimination that has silenced countless talented students. Will Amara find the courage to play the truth that has been buried for 15 years? If this story touched your heart, be sure to follow our channel for more powerful narratives that expose hidden truths. Like and comment below to share where you're watching from and what part of Amara's journey resonated with you most deeply. The stuffy air of Millstone Middle School's gymnasium clung to everyone like an unwelcome embrace. Parents, teachers, and students squeezed into metal folding chairs, their bodies generating a collective heat that the ancient ceiling fans couldn't begin to disperse. It was graduation rehearsal day, the culmination of 3 years of middle school life, a milestone meant to be celebrated with dignity and pride. But dignity wasn't on Melanie Crow's agenda. The music teacher's sharp laugh sliced through the respectful silence, turning every head toward the center of the room, where a small figure stood, clutching a violin case to her chest. Melanie's manicured finger pointed directly at Amara Ellison, the black girl with short braids, who had moved through the school's hallways like a ghost since 6th grade. "This one's playing the violin," Melanie announced loudly, the sheet music rustling dramatically in her hands. "Someone should tell her we need to hear it, not just see it." The laughter that followed rippled through the gymnasium, uncomfortable, but present nonetheless. A few parents shifted in their seats. A teacher coughed. Students exchanged glances, some grinning, others staring at their shoes. Amara didn't react, not visibly. She simply lowered her eyes to the scuffed gymnasium floor, her slender fingers tightening around the worn violin case as if it contained something infinitely precious, something that needed protection from the world around her. No one in that gymnasium knew she was deaf in her right ear. No one knew she played by feeling the vibrations travel through her collarbone, through her very skeleton. Music wasn't just something she heard, it was something she absorbed through her entire being. Principal Jonas Bell cleared his throat. "Let's continue with the rehearsal. Amara, you'll be playing after the valedictorian speech. Please be ready backstage." Amara nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, before turning away from Ms. Crow's dismissive glare. As she walked toward the side of the gymnasium, she caught a fragment of whispered conversation. DOES. And even talk in class. How's she gonna perform? That evening, as dusk settled over the trailer park on the outskirts of town, Amara sat on the metal steps of the mobile home she shared with her ailing aunt. The trailer was never meant to be permanent, just a temporary solution after her mother's death 3 years ago. But temporary had stretched into years, and the rust stains creeping up the sides suggested permanence of a different kind. Inside, her aunt's oxygen machine hummed its constant rhythm, the soundtrack of their lives now. The woman who had taken Amara in without question was losing her battle with COPD, one labored breath at a time. Amara rested her chin on the violin and closed her eyes. Her fingers found their positions on the fingerboard with the certainty that comes from thousands of hours of practice. She didn't need to hear the notes perfectly to know they were right. The strings trembled beneath her thin fingers, sending vibrations through the wooden body of the instrument, up through her jaw, into her skull. She didn't just hear the music, she absorbed it, felt it, became it. The melody she played wasn't the one approved for graduation. It was something older, deeper piece her mother had taught her. Back when their apartment in the city had been filled with music instead of silence. Back before the accident that took her mother's life and half of Amara's hearing. A car door slammed nearby, and Mrs. Jenkins from 3 trailers down called out a greeting. Amara nodded but didn't stop playing. Couldn't stop. The music was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only thing that made her feel connected to who she used to be. When the last note faded into the gathering darkness, Amara carefully placed the violin back in its case, Her fingers brushed against something tucked into the velvet lining, a folded piece of paper, creased and worn from years of being touched. She didn't need to unfold it to know what it said. The words had been committed to memory long ago, written in her mother's flowing handwriting. If they ever doubt you, play anyway. Amara traced the words with her fingertip, feeling the indentations where the pencil had pressed into the paper. Her mother had known, somehow, that the world would try to silence her daughter, had known that Amara would need this reminder when the doubts both external and internal became too loud to ignore. From inside the trailer, her aunt's labored cough broke the moment. Amara closed the violin case with a soft click and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring another day of navigating the hallways of Millstone Middle School, of pretending not to notice the whispers, of being the quiet black girl whom teachers like Ms. Crow felt entitled to mock. But for now, the music still hummed in her bones, a private defiance against those who thought her silence meant she had nothing to say. What none of them understood, what Melanie Crow could never comprehend, was that Amara's silence wasn't empty. It was full of melodies and harmonies and cadences that swelled inside her, waiting for the moment when they could finally break free. As she helped her aunt take her evening medication, Amara's mind drifted to the graduation ceremony. 3 days away. 3 days until she would stand on that stage, before all those people who had never really seen her, who had never bothered to look past her silence to the storm of music raging within. "You practicing for the big day?" her aunt asked between labored breaths, her one strong voice now barely above a whisper. Amara nodded, managing a small smile. "Your mama would be proud," the older woman said, reaching out to touch Amara's cheek. "So proud." Later that night, as her aunt's breathing finally evened out into sleep, Amara pulled out her violin once more. In the darkness of the tiny bedroom they shared, she positioned her fingers on the strings but didn't draw the bow across them. Instead, she simply held the instrument, feeling its weight, its potential. Tomorrow, at the final rehearsal, Ms. Crow and the others would be watching, waiting for her to fail, to prove their assumptions correct, that the quiet girl with the violin case was nothing more than a curiosity, a misplaced notion that someone like her could create something beautiful. But they didn't know what Amara knew, that sometimes the most powerful music comes from those who've been silenced. With that thought, she carefully returned the violin to its case, her fingers once again finding the folded note hidden in the velvet lining, a promise from the past, a bridge to the future. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would hear her, even if she couldn't hear herself. The morning sunlight streamed through the dusty blinds of Principal Jonas Bell's office, casting long shadows across his cluttered desk. The framed diplomas on the wall glinted in the light, a testament to 23 years in education that had left him with thinning hair and permanent worry lines etched around his eyes. He drummed his fingers nervously on a manila folder as the school's secretary's voice crackled over the intercom. "Amara Ellison is here to see you, Principal Bell." "Send her in, please," he replied, straightening his tie and rehearsing the words he'd been considering since yesterday's disastrous rehearsal. The door opened slowly, and Amara appeared in the doorway. She stood perfectly still, her violin case clutched tightly against her navy blue school uniform, eyes downcast as if expecting another humiliation. The bruise of yesterday's public mockery was still visible in the tight set of her shoulders. "Please, sit down," Principal Bell gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How are you doing today, Amara?" Silence hung between them. Amara slid into the chair but didn't loosen her grip on the violin case. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his wary, guarded, expecting nothing good. Principal Bell cleared his throat. "I wanted to speak with you about the graduation ceremony." He paused, noticing how she tensed slightly. "There's been a change in plans. Vanessa Harper, our scheduled soloist, has come down with severe tonsillitis. Her doctor says she won't be able to perform." Amara's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her case. "I know Ms. Crow has recommended Rebecca Wilson as a replacement, but double quotes." He hesitated, leaning forward slightly. "I heard your rehearsal yesterday." Before Ms. Crow's comments, a flash of something surprise perhaps crossed Amara's face so quickly he almost missed it. "Would you consider being our soloist for the ceremony?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "The piece you were practicing it was beautiful, genuinely moving." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside the office, the muffled sounds of students changing classes filtered through lockers, slamming, sneakers squeaking on linoleum, the perpetual hum of adolescent voices. Finally, Amara no data, single, deliberate movement. Principal Bell exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Excellent, that's wonderful, Amara, thank you. The door burst open without warning. Melanie Crow stood in the doorway, her angular face flushed with indignation. Her gaze darted between Principal Bell and Amara, lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval. Jonas, we need to discuss the soloist situation immediately, she said, barely acknowledging Amara's presence. Rebecca is prepared to step in, and her parents are on the school board. As you're well aware, Principal Bell straightened in his chair. Actually, Melanie, I've just asked Amara to be our soloist, and she's accepted. The music teacher's smile was brittle, forced. With all due respect, Jonas, this is a terrible decision. We need someone reliable, someone who can handle the pressure. Her eyes flicked dismissively to Amara. If she makes a mistake, fumbles a note, the whole ceremony will be ruined. Principal Bell frowned. The decision is made, Melanie. Ms. Crow's artificial smile tightened further. She turned to Amara, who sat motionless as a statue. If you mess up even one note, the embarrassment will be on Jonas's head, not mine. Remember that. With that, she spun on her heel and stalked out, leaving the door open behind her. I apologize for that, Principal Bell said quietly after she'd gone. Ms. Crow can be protective of her department's reputation. He slid a folder across the desk. Here's the official program. You'll perform after the valedictorian's speech. As Amara reached for the folder, he noticed a small tremor in her hand, the only outward sign of emotion she'd displayed. By lunchtime, word had spread through Millstone Middle School like wildfire. The hallways buzzed with speculation about the quiet girl being chosen over Rebecca Wilson. Students whispered behind their hands as Amara passed. The invisible girl suddenly visible in all the wrong ways. I heard she can't even talk right. My sister said she lives in that gross trailer park. No way she's better than Rebecca. Amara absorbed these comments with the same silent dignity she'd shown in Principal Bell's office. Moving through the crowded cafeteria with her eyes fixed straight ahead, she found her usual spot, a table in the corner, partially hidden by a support column, and took out a worn paperback instead of lunch. Is this seat taken? Amara looked up, startled to find Mrs. Donnelly, the school librarian, standing beside her table with a sandwich in hand. Without waiting for a response, the older woman sat down, arranging her cardigan around her plump frame. I heard about your solo, Mrs. Donnelly said, unwrapping her lunch. It's about time someone recognized your talent. She took a bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. Ms. Crow has always had a blind spot when it comes to certain students. Across the cafeteria, a small commotion erupted. Rebecca Wilson's mother, Patricia, one of the regular parent volunteers, was engaged in a heated conversation with Ms. Crow. Their eyes occasionally darted toward Amara's corner. Perhaps music is the most precious thing she has, Mrs. Donnelly said quietly, following Amara's gaze. Some people never understand that what seems like a mere performance to one person might be another person's entire world. After school, Amara stayed behind for the rescheduled rehearsal. The gymnasium was mostly empty now, with just a few staff members setting up chairs for tomorrow's practice. As she took her position on the makeshift stage, she noticed something unusual: a man sitting in the back row, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He held a notepad and seemed to be watching her intently. When Amara raised her violin to begin, she caught sight of Ms. Crow exchanging a meaningful glance with Mr. Henderson, the history teacher. Something about their shared look made her stomach tighten with unease. She played anyway, losing herself in the music as she always did. The vibrations traveled through her bones, filling the empty spaces inside her with something warm and alive. For those few minutes, nothing else existed. Not Ms. Crow's hostility, not the whispers in the hallway, not even her own doubts. When she finished, the small audience applauded politely. Principal Bell nodded approvingly. The man in the baseball cap scribbled something in his notebook before slipping out a side door. Later, as Amara gathered her things from her locker, she noticed the door to the teacher's lounge slightly ajar. Passing by, she glanced inside and froze. There, in the trash can beside the door, was a violin string. Not just any string, but one that appeared to have been deliberately cut. The clean, precise cut glinted in the fluorescent light like a warning. Amara stared at it for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, slowly, deliberately, She closed her locker and headed for the exit, the weight of her violin case suddenly heavier in her hand. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school grounds. As Amara walked toward the bus stop, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion, something beyond her control, something that had been waiting to unfold for a very long time. The final rehearsal day arrived with an unusual heaviness in the air, a sticky June humidity that pressed down on Millstone like a damp blanket. By noon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm later in the day. Amara watched them from the classroom window during her final math exam, finding patterns in their shapes that reminded her of musical notation crescendos and diminuendos painted across the sky in shades of charcoal and slate. The gymnasium had been transformed since yesterday. Now rows of folding chairs filled the space, adorned with blue and gold ribbons, the school colors. A proper stage had been erected overnight by the maintenance staff, complete with a podium bearing the school's emblem. Parents and teachers milled about, making last-minute adjustments to decorations while Principal Bell directed traffic from the center of the room. "Everyone, places please, this is our final run-through." Students shuffled into position, their excitement palpable. For most of them, tomorrow marked the end of middle school and the beginning of high school, a transition worthy of ceremony and celebration. For Amara, it marked something else entirely, a chance to be heard, truly heard, perhaps for the first time. She made her way to the back of the gymnasium, where performers were instructed to wait. The weight of her violin case was reassuring in her hand, a familiar companion through years of silence and solitude. Finding a quiet corner, Amara knelt down and placed the case on the floor. Her fingers moved to the brass latches, flipping them open with practiced ease. The moment she lifted the lid, time seemed to stop. Wherefore taut strings should have stretched across her violin, there was nothing. Just empty air. The bridge lay flat against the wooden body, useless without strings to support. The instrument looked violated, wounded like something sacred that had been deliberately desecrated. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers hovered over the violin, trembling slightly as they traced the smooth wood where the strings should have been. Only the fine tuners remained, their tiny screws still intact but serving no purpose now. But there, nestled in the red velvet lining, her mother's note remained untouched. "If they ever doubt you, play anyway." The words seemed to mock her now. How could she play without strings? "Amara, is everything ready?" Principal Bell's voice broke through her shock. He approached from across the gym, his face expectant. When he reached her side and saw the stringless violin, his expression shifted from confusion to dismay to anger in rapid succession. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Students nearby turned to look, sensing drama unfolding. "When did you last check your instrument?" Amara remained frozen, staring at the violated violin. It had been fine yesterday after rehearsal. She'd practiced at home last night, which meant someone had done this today, here at school. "Ms. Ellison will need to use the school's violin," Principal Bell announced loudly, his eyes scanning the growing crowd of onlookers. "Ms. Crow, please arrange that immediately." Melanie Crow emerged from the cluster of teachers, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm afraid the school's violin is currently being repaired. Principal Bell, we won't have it back until next week." "That's convenient," Mrs. Donnelly murmured from somewhere behind Amara, just loud enough to be heard. Principal Bell's face flushed with frustration. "Then we'll have to borrow one." "Surely someone, I can bring one tomorrow," Rebecca Wilson offered sweetly from the front row, where she sat with her mother. "And I already know the piece. So if Amara doesn't feel comfortable performing anymore, double quotes, whispers rippled through the gymnasium. Amara finally looked up, her eyes meeting Ms. Crow's across the room. The teacher's expression revealed nothing, but there was something in her gaze, a cold satisfaction that made Amara's stomach clench. "Amara," Principal Bell said gently, "can you still perform tomorrow? We'll find you an instrument, I promise." The question hung in the air. Everyone was watching now, waiting for her response, waiting for her to speak something she rarely did in public. The pressure of their collective gaze was suffocating. Amara closed the violin case with a soft click. Without a word, she rose to her feet, tucked the case under her arm, and walked out of the gymnasium. The heavy doors swung shut behind her with a dull thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Outside, the first fat raindrops of the approaching storm splattered against the pavement. Amara didn't run for cover. She walked steadily, letting the rain soak through her clothes, plastering her braids to her forehead. The violin case, now just a shell protecting a wounded instrument, grew, slick with rainwater in her grip. She walked the 2 miles home instead of taking the bus, ignoring the occasional car that slowed beside her, drivers offering concerned looks or rolls of their windows to ask if she needed a ride. By the time she reached the trailer park, the storm was in full force, thunder rolling across the sky in waves that she felt more than heard. Her aunt was asleep when she entered, the oxygen machine humming its steady rhythm. Amara changed out of her wet clothes in the tiny bathroom, carefully hanging her uniform over the shower rod to dry. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, the empty violin case open beside her. As darkness fell, Amara made a decision. Slipping back into dry clothes, she grabbed her aunt's spare key and the violin case. Outside, the storm had moved on, leaving behind puddles that reflected the emerging stars. The night air smelled clean, washed of the day's humidity. Millstone was a small town, the kind where most businesses closed by 6 and streetlights were few and far between. Amara walked through neighborhoods where dinner was being served behind lit windows, past the shuttered Main Street shops, toward the old part of town where buildings predated even the oldest residents' memories. On a corner where maple trees cast deep shadows stood Millstone's music emporium, or rather, what remained of it. The store had closed 3 years ago when old Mr. Harmon's arthritis had made it impossible for him to continue his work as the town's only luthier. The building stood empty now, its display windows covered with brown paper, a for-lease sign faded by years of sun and neglect. But behind the building was a small apartment where Mr. Harmon still lived, too attached to the place to move even after closing his business. A single light burned in his window as Amara approached the back door and knocked hesitantly. Shuffling footsteps approached, followed by the rattle of multiple locks being undone. The door creaked open to reveal a stooped figure, a man in his late 70s, with wispy white hair and clouded eyes that stared just past Amara's shoulder. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice rough with age. Amara cleared her throat. "Mr. Harmon, it's Amara Ellison. I used to come to your shop with my mother." The old man's face transformed, deep wrinkles rearranging themselves into a smile. "Little Amara, Julia's girl." He stepped back, gesturing her inside. Come in, come in. What brings you here so late?" Inside, the small apartment was cluttered with the tools of his former trade, wood samples. Specialized tools, violin parts in various stages of completion. Despite his blindness, everything seemed to have its place in a system only he understood. Amara placed her violin case on his workbench and opened it. "Someone took the strings," she said simply. "All of them." Mr. Harmon's gnarled hands reached out, finding the violin with uncanny accuracy. His fingers moved over it gently, assessing the damage with the sensitivity of decades of craftsmanship. "Not just took," he murmured. "See how the pegs have been marked. Someone wanted to make sure you couldn't simply replace the strings." He sighed deeply. "Who would do such a thing to an instrument?" "I'm supposed to play at graduation tomorrow," Amara explained, her voice barely audible. It was important. The old man was silent for a long moment, his blind eyes fixed on some middle distance. Then he nodded once, decisively. "Wait here," he instructed, making his way to a door at the back of the apartment. When he returned, he carried a violin case, much older and more elegant than Amara's. The leather was worn smooth with age, the brass fittings tarnished to a soft gold. "This was my granddaughter's," he said, placing it carefully on the workbench. "Catherine's. She died before she could play her final recital. Cancer, when she was just 14. His voice caught slightly. "You play like her, you know. I can tell just by how you hold the bow. You play like someone carrying too much pain." He opened the case to reveal a beautiful instrument, its wood glowing with a warm patina that only comes from years of loving care. "Take this," Mr. Harmon said. "Play it tomorrow." Amara stared at the violin, unable to speak. "It's been silent too long," the old man continued. "Instruments need to be played, Amara. They're alive in their own way. This one has been waiting for the right person." As Amara reached for the violin, her fingers brushed against the velvet lining of the case. There, nearly worn away by time, was an inscription. In the dim light of the workbench lamp, she could just make out faded letters, though not enough to read what they said. "Thank you," she whispered, carefully closing the case. Mr. Harmon nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "You play for all of us who can't anymore, for your mother, for Catherine." For everyone who's been silenced. Outside, the night had deepened. Stars glittered overhead as Amara walked home, the borrowed violin case in her hands like a precious gift or perhaps a sacred trust. What she didn't see was the framed photograph hanging on Mr. Harmon's wall, a school portrait of a young girl with a bright smile, standing next to a much younger Melanie Crowe. Both wore matching music competition ribbons. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, casting jewel-toned patterns across the empty pews. The church stood on the oldest street in Millstone, its stone walls having witnessed generations of the town's history, celebrations and sorrows, beginnings and endings. In the stillness of the sanctuary, Amara sat alone in the front row, Catherine Harmon's violin case balanced on her knees. She'd come here at dawn, when the streets were still quiet and the only person she'd encountered was the elderly custodian who'd recognized her from the community meals the church hosted twice monthly. "Practice all you want, honey," he'd said, unlocking the sanctuary doors. "Nobody uses the place till Sunday." The graduation ceremony was just hours away now. A small digital clock on her phone counted down the minutes, each one bringing her closer to a moment she both longed for and dreaded. Amara opened the borrowed violin case with reverent care. Catherine's instrument gleamed in the colored light, its warm, amber surface polished to a soft glow. It was a superior instrument to her own, that much was immediately clear. Even before touching the strings, she could sense the quality of its craftsmanship. Her fingers traced the curve of the violin's body, feeling the smoothness of wood that had been lovingly maintained despite years of disuse. It felt wrong somehow, as if she were intruding on someone else's abandoned dream. Yet Mr. Harmon had insisted this was what Catherine would have wanted. Drawing a deep breath, Amara lifted the violin to her shoulder and positioned it against her neck. The fit was different from her own instruments, slightly larger, the balance subtly altered. She drew the bow across the strings experimentally. The sound that emerged was startlingly rich, resonant in a way her school violin had never been. The note hung in the air, bouncing off the high ceiling and stone walls, multiplying and returning to her like a living thing. For the next hour, Amara lost herself in practice, adjusting to the feel of Catherine's violin. The piece she'd chosen for graduation was one her mother had taught her years ago, a modified version of Massenet's Meditation from Thai that had been simplified for a younger player but still retained the emotional heart of the original. As she played, the empty church seemed to fill with invisible listeners: her mother, Catherine, all the people who'd been silenced too soon. So absorbed was she in the music that she didn't notice the elderly woman who'd slipped into the back pew until the final notes faded into silence. "You have her posture," the woman said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty sanctuary. "Exactly her posture." Amara lowered the violin slowly, turning to face the stranger. The woman was in her 70s, elegantly dressed in a manner that spoke of old money, something rare in Millstone. Her silver hair was styled immaculately, and a strand of pearls gleamed at her throat. "I didn't mean to interrupt," the woman continued, making her way down the aisle toward Amara. "I come here sometimes, when I need to think." The music drew me in. She paused, studying Amara with intense blue eyes. "That violin belonged to Catherine Harmon, didn't it?" Amara nodded, surprised. "I thought so. I'd recognize its voice anywhere." The woman sat down in the pew across the aisle from Amara. "I'm Eleanor Prescott. I was Catherine's piano teacher, many years ago." Amara carefully returned the violin to its case, unsure how to respond. "You play beautifully," Eleanor said, but with too much anger. Her gaze was penetrating, as if she could see straight through to the storm of emotions Amara kept locked inside. Catherine played with grief, but never anger. "There's a difference." From her handbag, Eleanor withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age, its edges softened by time and handling. "This was meant for Melanie Crowe," she said, turning the envelope so Amara could see the name written on the front in faded ink. "I never delivered it." Perhaps that was a mistake. Amara stared at the envelope, a question in her eyes. "Catherine wrote it before she died," Eleanor explained. "They were close, one student and teacher, then friends. Competitive friends, but friends nonetheless." She traced the edge of the envelope with one manicured fingernail. "I found it among her things afterward. By then, it seemed too late." The church bells chimed the hour, startling both of them. "Take it," Eleanor said suddenly, holding out the envelope. "Perhaps it's time someone did." When Amara hesitated, Eleanor simply placed it on the pew between them. We all make choices we regret, Amara, even those who seem above reproach. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. Good luck at your graduation. I think I'll attend. It's been years since I've heard that violin played properly. With that, she walked back up the aisle and out through the heavy wooden doors, leaving Amara alone with the mysterious envelope. After a moment's hesitation, Amara picked it up. The paper felt fragile beneath her fingers, as if it might disintegrate if handled too roughly. She turned it over, noting the unbroken seal. Whatever message it contained had remained unread for years. Just as she was about to slip it into her backpack, the envelope slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor and landing face up. A section of the letter was visible through the partially unsealed flap, and before she could stop herself, Amara read the line that fate had revealed, ... If she discovers what we did, everything ends. Beneath it, Melanie Crow's name was written in a young girl's careful cursive. Amara quickly retrieved the envelope, her heart racing. What had Catherine and Miss Crow done? And who was she that they feared would discover their secret? The church suddenly felt less welcoming. The colored light from the stained glass windows no longer beautiful but unsettling, casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. By the time Amara returned to school for the pre-graduation assembly, rumors had already begun to circulate. As she walked through the main entrance, she could feel eyes following her, heard the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. Using some old dead girl's violin. Probably given to her out of pity. Ms. Crow says she's just playing for attention. The main hallway was crowded with students in graduation robes, parents with cameras, younger siblings running between clusters of adults. At the far end, near the gymnasium doors, Principal Bell was engaged in a heated conversation with several people, including Patricia Wilson and Ms. Crow. Their voices carried across the noisy hallway in fragments. Completely inappropriate to switch performers at the last minute. Question of talent versus favoritism. Using her disability to manipulate. Double quotes, disability. The word hung in the air like poison. Amara froze mid-step. How did they know about her partial deafness? She'd been so careful to hide it, to compensate, to never let on that she could only hear properly from one ear. As if sensing her presence, Miss Crow looked up, her gaze locking with Amara's across the crowded hallway. For a split second, something like fear flickered across the teacher's face, quickly replaced by her usual mask of professional disdain. Pastor Green, whose church hosted the community dinners Amara sometimes attended with her aunt, broke away from the group and approached her, his kind face creased with concern. "Don't let them discourage you," he said quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I heard you practicing this morning. It's the first time anyone's made that violin sound like a prayer since Catherine played it." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Music like that doesn't come from technique alone, it comes from somewhere deeper." Before Amara could respond, a commotion erupted near the school office. Someone had played a distorted recording of yesterday's rehearsal over the school's announcement system, the moment when Amara had first discovered her violin's strings missing, followed by muffled laughter and a voice that sounded suspiciously like Rebecca Wilson's, saying, "Now everyone can hear how special she is." The recording cut off abruptly, but the damage was done. Laughter rippled through groups of students, while adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. Amara clutched Catherine's violin case tighter against her chest, her knuckles whitening with the effort. Inside her pocket, the unopened letter seemed to burn against her hip, its secrets suddenly more threatening than intriguing. As she made her way through the crowd toward the performers' waiting area, Melanie Crow stepped directly into her path, her voice pitched low enough that only Amara could hear. "Playing the victim has always been easy for certain types of students," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Using your ... condition to gain sympathy points is clever, I'll grant you that. But don't think for a moment that I don't see exactly what you're doing." She leaned closer, her perfume something expensive and suffocating enveloping Amara like a cloud. "Some students need to learn their place. Catherine eventually did. So will you." With that, she swept away, leaving Amara standing alone in a hallway full of people, the weight of unspoken histories pressing down on her like a physical force. In her pocket, Eleanor's envelope waited, its secrets temporarily hidden but not forgotten, and in her hands, Catherine Harmon's violin, an instrument that had witnessed whatever had transpired between Catherine and Miss Crow all those years ago. suddenly heavier than before. The performers' waiting area had been hastily converted from a classroom adjacent to the gymnasium. Plastic chairs lined the walls, and a makeshift vanity with a cloudy mirror had been set up in one corner. Hand-lettered signs taped to the wall indicated when each performer should prepare to go on stage. Amara sat alone in the furthest corner, Catherine's violin case balanced on her knees. The room buzzed with the nervous energy of the other performers, the choir members adjusting their robes, the student council president practicing her speech in whispered tones, the jazz band tuning their instruments. No one spoke to Amara. Some avoided looking at her altogether, as if her presence was an uncomfortable reminder of the scene that had just played out in the hallway. Through the thin walls, she could hear the growing rumble of the audience assembling in the gymnasium. Graduation day had always been Millstone Middle School's biggest event, drawing extended families from as far away as Chicago and Indianapolis. The bleachers would be packed, the folding chairs filled to capacity. All those eyes, all those ears. Amara closed her eyes, trying to center herself. The weight of Catherine's envelope pressed against her through the pocket of her dress, a constant reminder of the mystery that had suddenly inserted itself into her life. She should have left it at the church, should never have picked it up. Yet somehow, it felt important, connected to this moment in ways she didn't yet understand. The door swung open, and Mrs. Donnelly entered, her kind face flushed with what looked like anger barely contained. "Amara," she said, kneeling beside her chair, "I thought you should know what's being said out there." Her voice was low, meant for Amara's ears only. "Rebecca's mother is telling anyone who will listen that you're using a borrowed violin out of pity. And Miss Crow," she hesitated, lips pressed into a thin line. "What about her?" Amara asked, the words barely audible. Mrs. Donnelly's expression darkened further. "She's suggesting that you're these are her words, not mine, using your hearing impairment to manipulate people's sympathies, as if your talent isn't real, just some ploy for attention." She reached out, briefly squeezing Amara's hand. "It's despicable." Amara stared at her, frozen. So it was out now, her carefully guarded secret exposed for everyone's consumption. Her partial deafness had been her private struggle, something she'd worked around, compensated for, hidden from curious eyes and pitying stares. How did she know? Amara whispered. Mrs. Donnelly looked confused. "Know what, dear? About my ear. I never told anyone at school." Understanding dawned on the librarian's face, followed by something that looked like realization and then alarm. "Oh, Amara, I think." But whatever she was about to say was cut short by Principal Bell's arrival. 5 minutes, everyone," he announced, clapping his hands for attention. "Performers, check your places on the schedule. Amara, you're on." After Madison's valedictorian speech, he offered her an encouraging smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The strain of the morning's drama was evident in the tight set of his shoulders. As the room erupted into a flurry of last-minute preparations, Amara carefully opened Catherine's violin case. The instrument gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its polished surface reflecting her own solemn expression back at her. A memory surfaced, her mother adjusting her posture during practice, gentle hands on her shoulders. "Music isn't just in the ears, Amara. It's in the bones, the blood, the breath. Even if you couldn't hear at all, you'd still feel it here." She'd placed her palm against Amara's chest, right over her heart, where it matters most. The door opened again, and Eleanor Prescott appeared, looking oddly out of place among the teenagers in their graduation finery. Her gaze found Amara immediately. "I need a moment," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made even Principal Bell step aside. She crossed to Amara's corner, lowering herself gracefully into the adjacent chair. "I made a terrible mistake giving you that letter," she said without preamble. "It wasn't my place to involve you in something that happened so long ago." Amara's hand instinctively moved to her pocket, where the envelope remained unopened. "I let old anger cloud my judgment," Eleanor continued. "Please, give it back. Some secrets are better left buried." Before Amara could respond, a disturbance at the door drew everyone's attention. Melanie Crow stood there, her face draining of color at the sight of Eleanor Prescott sitting beside Amara. "What are you doing here?" Miss Crow demanded, her usual composure fracturing visibly. Eleanor stood, facing her former colleague with a steely gaze. "Bearing witness, Melanie, something I should have done years ago." The tension between the two women was palpable, stretching across the room like an invisible thread pulled taut to the breaking point. Students and staff alike fell silent, sensing the weight of unspoken history. "This isn't the time or place," Miss Crow said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "These children don't need to be dragged into ancient history." Eleanor's smile was cold. "Interesting how you always decide what other people need, Melanie. Some things never change." Principal Bell cleared his throat, stepping between the two women. "Ladies, the ceremony is about to begin. Whatever this is, it needs to wait." Reluctantly, Eleanor turned back to Amara. "Be careful," she murmured. "She's been silencing voices for decades." As she left, Ms. Crow's gaze followed her, something like fear flickering across her carefully composed features. Then her attention snapped back to Amara, eyes narrowing as she noticed the unfamiliar violin case. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice sharp with sudden recognition. Before Amara could answer, the first notes of pomp and circumstance drifted through from the gymnasium. Principal Bell ushered Ms. Crow out, throwing an apologetic glance toward Amara, left alone with her thoughts. Amara removed Catherine's violin from its case, feeling its weight settle into her hands as if it belonged there. As she did, something fluttered from the inside of the case, a small piece of paper that had been tucked beneath the instrument. It was a fragment of sheet music, worn and yellowed with age. At the top, in faded pencil, was written "Original composition by Catherine Harmon," and in the margin, circled in red pencil, a phone number. The noise from the gymnasium grew louder as the procession began. Amara carefully tucked the sheet music into her pocket alongside the still unopened letter. Questions multiplied in her mind, each one leading to another, forming a complex web with Melanie Crow at its center. Why did Miss Crow recognize Catherine's violin with such alarm? What secret did the letter contain that Eleanor now regretted sharing? And most puzzling, how had Miss Crow known about Amara's hearing impairment when she'd never told anyone at school? The door opened, and one of the student council members poked her head in. There on the valedictorian speech. "You're up next, Amara." Taking a deep breath, Amara rose to her feet, violin in hand. Whatever secrets lay buried in Millstone's past, whatever connection existed between Catherine Harmon and Melanie Crow, would have to wait. For now, there was only the music, the one thing that had always been hers, the one voice that had never abandoned her. As she stepped into the hallway, she could hear Madison's voice echoing through the gymnasium's speakers, talking about futures and possibilities and dreams. Ahead lay the stage, the audience, the moment of truth. Behind her stretched a mystery that seemed to grow deeper with each passing hour. Amara positioned the violin under her chin, feeling its familiar weight against her collarbone. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. "Music isn't just in the ears, it's where it matters most." For the first time that day, a sense of calm settled over her. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the one thing no one could take from her: the music that lived not just in her hearing ear, but in every bone and muscle and heartbeat. The applause for Madison's speech swelled and then subsided. Principal Bell's voice announced, "And now, a musical selection performed by Amara Ellison." Amara stepped onto the stage, into the harsh glare of the spotlight, facing hundreds of faces that blurred into a sea of expectation. In the front row, Ms. Crow sat rigid, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Eleanor Prescott watched with the intensity of someone witnessing a reckoning long overdue. And from the back of the gymnasium, partially hidden in shadow, Mr. Harmon stood leaning on his cane, blind eyes fixed in Amara's direction, as if he could see her through sheer force of will. Amara raised Catherine's violin and drew the bow across its strings, releasing the first pure note into the waiting silence. The graduation ceremony ended in a blur of blue caps, flashing cameras, and emotional parents clutching tissue packets. Amara moved through it like a ghost, accepting polite congratulations with silent nods, avoiding the curious stares that followed her across the gymnasium floor. Her performance had left a strange, suspended silence before the applause began, tentative at first, then building to something that resembled respect, if not quite understanding. Ms. Crow had vanished immediately afterward, making her absence conspicuous during the final procession. Eleanor Prescott had lingered just long enough to press a business card into Amara's hand with a whispered, "Call me when you're ready to know more." Principal Bell had squeezed her shoulder once, his eyes communicating something between apology and pride. Now, alone in her bedroom, Amara spread 3 items across her faded quilt: Catherine's sheet music with the mysterious phone number, Eleanor's business card, and the still unopened envelope addressed to Melanie Crow. The evening lights slanted through the trailer's small window, casting long shadows across these fragments of a story she had stumbled into without warning. Her aunt's oxygen machine hummed in the next room, its rhythm a familiar counterpoint to the silence. Aunt Jessie had been too ill to attend the graduation, but she'd insisted Amara tell her everything when she returned home. "I want to hear about every minute," she'd said, "especially how you played that fancy violin." The phone number on Catherine's sheet music was faded but still legible. After a moment's hesitation, Amara reached for her aunt's landline phone, a relic in the age of smartphones, but the only phone in their household. Her fingers hovered over the buttons, a strange reluctance holding her back. Whatever awaited her on the other end of that call would change things irrevocably. She could feel it with the same certainty that she felt music in her bones. Finally, she dialed. 3 rings, then a click. "Millstone Historical Society. This is Thomas speaking." Amara's voice caught in her throat. She hadn't expected an institution to answer. "Hello?" the man prompted. I found this number on an old piece of sheet music," Amara said, the words rushing out. It was in a violin case that belonged to Catherine Harmon. A long pause followed. "Catherine Harmon," the man repeated, his tone shifting to something more careful. "May I ask, who's calling?" "My name is Amara Ellison. I'm a student at Millstone Middle School. I played Catherine's violin at graduation today." Another pause, longer this time. "Where did you get her violin?" "Mr. Harmon gave it to me." "Someone damaged mine." A deep sigh echoed through the line. "I see. I'm Thomas Reeves. I used to teach music at Millstone High School before I retired. Catherine was one of my students, one of my best." The connection crackled with static, or perhaps it was just the weight of memory traveling across time and telephone wires. "The sheet music you found," Thomas continued, "is it echoes in silence?" Amara glanced down at the paper on her bed. The title, written in delicate script at the top of the page, matched exactly what he'd said. "Yes." "How did you know?" "Because Catherine wrote it, her final composition before she died. It was, double quotes, he hesitated. "It was supposed to be performed at the state music competition that year. But it never was." Amara's fingers tightened around the receiver. "Why not?" "Because Melanie Crow claimed it as her own. She was Catherine's private tutor then, not yet a full-time teacher. She submitted it to the judges under her name after Catherine passed away." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "Even across the years, it won first place, launched Melanie's career, got her the teaching position at Millstone." The room seemed to tilt slightly, reality shifting beneath Amara's feet. She stole a dead girl's music and used it to build her reputation as a composer and educator. Catherine had no family fighting for her, just her grandfather, who was already starting to lose his sight by then. It was a small-town scandal that eventually died down. People forgot, or pretended to. Melanie became the respected teacher you know today. Amara thought of Miss Crow's reaction upon seeing Catherine's violin. The flash of recognition, followed by something like fear. "There's more, isn't there?" Thomas's sigh was heavy with the weight of old regrets. Catherine was on scholarship, the Millstone Music Foundation Award. It covered her private lessons, competition fees, everything. After she died, there were irregularities discovered in how those scholarships were awarded, favoritism, discrimination. Some students who deserved opportunities never got them because they didn't fit a certain profile. "Profile," Amara repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. Melanie had very specific ideas about who deserved musical education, who had real talent, and they all looked a certain way, came from certain families. He paused. "You can probably guess who didn't make the cut." The implication was clear enough. Amara thought about her own middle school experience, how Ms. Crow had consistently overlooked her, dismissed her, until she was forced into the spotlight by Principal Bell's decision. "There was a formal complaint filed," Thomas continued. "Evidence gathered, but somehow, it all disappeared. The investigation was dropped, and those of us who pushed for accountability found ourselves marginalized, then eventually pushed out altogether." Amara's gaze drifted to the unopened envelope on her bed. Was Eleanor Prescott involved? Thomas's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Eleanor. She was Catherine's piano teacher, one of the loudest voices demanding justice after what happened. But she left town suddenly, right when the investigation was shut down. "I always wondered why," The pieces were starting to align, forming a picture that made Amara's stomach tighten with a mixture of anger and vindication. All those years of being ignored, dismissed, treated as if her presence was an inconvenience, it hadn't been her imagination. It had been deliberate, systematic. "What should I do with this information?" Amara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "That depends," Thomas replied. "What do you want to happen?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Justice for Catherine, recognition of her own talent, exposure of Ms. Crow's decades of discrimination. All of it seemed simultaneously too much and not enough. "I want to play," she said finally. "I want to play Catherine's music the way it was meant to be played. I want people to know the truth." "Then that's what you should do." Thomas's voice had softened. "Catherine's composition deserves to be heard under her name. And you, Amara Ellison, deserve to be heard too." After hanging up, Amara sat motionless on her bed, the evening shadows lengthening around her. The truth had a weight to it, a responsibility she hadn't asked for but now couldn't ignore. A text message alert broke her reverie. It was from a number she didn't recognize. "Your performance today was beautiful, but dangerous. Be careful who you trust with that violin. Not everyone wants its music heard." Before she could process this cryptic warning, her aunt's voice called from the living room. "Amara, Principal Bell is here to see you." Quickly gathering the items from her bed and tucking them into her desk drawer, Amara went to meet her unexpected visitor. Principal Bell stood awkwardly in their small living space, his tall frame seeming too large for the modest surroundings. He held his suit jacket folded over one arm, his tie loosened slightly at the collar. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, nodding respectfully to Aunt Jessie. "But I needed to speak with Amara about what happened today." Aunt Jessie gestured to their worn couch. "Please, sit down. Would you like some iced tea?" "No, thank you." He perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. "Amara, your performance was exceptional, truly, but it's caused quite a situation." "What kind of situation?" Aunt Jessie asked, her protective instincts visibly rising. Principal Bell sighed. "The superintendent called an emergency meeting. Apparently, there have been complaints from some parents, specifically the Wilsons, about the last-minute change in performers, and Ms. Crow has, well, she's suggested that allowing Amara to perform was inappropriate given certain circumstances." "What circumstances?" Aunt Jessie demanded, her voice sharpening despite her weakened state. "She claims that Amara's hearing impairment should have disqualified her from performing, for her own sake." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "She's suggesting that I showed poor judgment in putting Amara in a situation that might cause her embarrassment or stress." Aunt Jessie's laugh was bitter. "That woman has some nerve. Amara has perfect pitch in the ear that works. She feels the music better than most people with 2 good ears ever could." Principal Bell nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here. The superintendent has suggested that perhaps Amara should withdraw from the district music showcase next week." To avoid further controversy, the silence that followed was thick with indignation. Amara felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the sensation of being erased, silenced, pushed aside for someone else's comfort. "And if she doesn't withdraw?" Aunt Jessie asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Principal Bell met her gaze directly. "Then I might be asked to withdraw my support, which could mean my job." The implications hung in the air between them. Principal Bell, the only administrator who had ever seen Amara's talent, who had given her the chance to perform, was being pressured to sacrifice her opportunity or risk his own career. "What do you think I should do?" Amara asked, breaking her silence. Principal Bell looked at her, something like regret shadowing his features. "Officially, as your principal, I should advise you to consider what's best for everyone involved, including yourself." And unofficially, a small, defiant smile curved his lips. "Unofficially, I think you should play, and not just any music. I think you should play something that matters." He stood, reaching for his jacket. "Whatever you decide, Amara, know that your talent is real. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After he left, Aunt Jessie turned to Amara, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You know I'll support whatever you want to do, baby, but that woman has had it out for you since day one. Are you sure you want to keep fighting this battle?" Amara thought about Catherine's violin, about the sheet music with its haunting title, "Echoes in Silence," about all the students like her who had been deemed unworthy of opportunity by Melanie Crow's narrow vision of talent. "It's not just my battle anymore," she said quietly. "It never was." That night, as her aunt slept, Amara finally opened Eleanor's envelope. Inside was a single page, written in a young girl's careful handwriting. Ms. Crow, I know what you did with my scholarship application. I know about the others too. If she discovers what we did, everything ends. I can't live with this guilt anymore. After the competition, I'm going to tell the truth. Catherine, at the bottom of the page, in different handwriting, was a single line. She died the night before the competition. Convenient timing, wasn't it? The Millstone Community Center auditorium glowed with expectation. Rows of polished wooden seats stretched toward the back wall, each one occupied by a parent, teacher, school board member, or curious community resident, drawn by the whispers that had spread through town like wildfire since graduation. The annual district showcase was always well attended, but tonight's audience had an edge to it, an anticipation that crackled in the air like static before a storm. Backstage, performers from all 5 schools in the district prepared in various states of nervous excitement. High schoolers tuned instruments, middle schoolers reviewed sheet music, elementary students practiced dance steps in sequined costumes. Amid this controlled chaos, Amara sat alone on a wooden stool in the far corner, Catherine's violin case balanced on her knees. 3 days had passed since she'd read Catherine's letter. 3 days of careful preparation, quiet research, and difficult decisions. She'd spoken with Eleanor Prescott, who had filled in more pieces of the puzzle. She'd visited Mr. Harmon again, playing Catherine's composition for him until tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. She'd called Thomas Reeves, who had agreed to attend tonight's performance despite his misgivings about revisiting old wounds. Are you certain about this? Eleanor had asked yesterday, her elegant hands clasping Amara's with surprising strength. Once it's done, there's no going back. Melanie has powerful friends, even now. Amara had simply nodded. The time for silence had passed. Now, as the assistant director called for performers to line up in order, Amara carefully opened Catherine's violin case. The instrument nestled in red velvet seemed to have acquired new significance, since she'd learned its history, not just a violin, but a vessel carrying the unfulfilled promise of a young girl silenced too soon. Amara Ellison, you're on after the high school jazz quartet. The assistant director checked her clipboard. You're still playing Massenet's Meditation, correct? Amara met her gaze steadily. There's been a change in the program. The woman frowned. Changes need to be approved by the committee, Ms. Crow specifically. It's been approved, Principal Bell interrupted, appearing beside them with program notes in hand. Last-minute adjustment, already cleared with the superintendent. The slight emphasis on the last word carried the weight of authority and something like triumph. The assistant director hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. 5 minutes until you're on. As she walked away, Principal Bell turned to Amara. The auditorium is packed. Word spread fast after you uploaded that practice video last night. Indeed. Amara's surreptitious recording of herself playing Catherine's composition in the church had accumulated thousands of views in less than 24 hours. She'd titled it simply, The Girl Who Plays Silence, an ironic nod to the whispers that had followed her through the hallways. Is she here? Amara asked quietly. Front row center. Looking like she's attending a funeral rather than a music showcase. A grim smile flitted across Principal Bell's face. The superintendent is beside her. And 3 school board members. Amara nodded, her fingers tightening around the neck of the violin. And the others. Mr. Harmon is seated on the aisle, as requested. Eleanor Prescott is 2 rows behind Ms. Crow. Thomas Reeves came with his wife there, near the back. He paused, studying her face. Are you absolutely sure about this, Amara? There's still time to play the Massenet piece instead. The hesitation in his voice was understandable. His career, his reputation, his future all were potentially at risk based on what happened in the next 15 minutes. Yet he had stood by her, had fought for her right to perform, despite mounting pressure from the Wilsons and their allies. I'm sure, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. From the stage came the final notes of the jazz quartet's performance, followed by enthusiastic applause. The assistant director motioned urgently for Amara to take her position in the wings. Whatever happens, Principal Bell said, squeezing her shoulder gently. I'm proud of you. The stage lights were blinding as Amara walked to the center mark. The audience fell silent, a collective intake of breath as they recognized the girl from the viral video, the one who had caused such controversy at graduation. In the front row, Melanie Crow sat rigid, her face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite conceal the tension in her jaw. Amara positioned Catherine's violin under her chin, feeling its familiar weight against her collarbone. The wood was warm against her skin, as if alive with its own memories and desires. She raised the bow, suspended it for a moment above the strings, and then began to play. The first notes of echoes in silence filled the auditorium, delicate, questioning, like the hesitant beginning of a conversation long delayed. The composition was unlike anything most of the audience had heard before. It didn't follow conventional patterns or expected progressions. It built slowly, each phrase adding a new layer of complexity and emotion to what had come before. As Amara played, images from the past rose unbidden in her mind, her mother adjusting her posture during early lessons, the first time she'd realized her right ear was failing, Miss Crow's dismissive laugh during that fateful rehearsal. But now these personal memories were joined by others. Catherine bent over this same violin, crafting the very notes that now filled the auditorium. The young Melanie Crow claiming another's work as her own, scholarship applications marked with red ink, dreams denied based on nothing more than prejudice disguised as professional judgment. The music swelled, growing more insistent, more demanding. In the front row, Miss Crow's composed facade began to crack. She shifted in her seat, glanced at her program, then at the superintendent beside her. Recognition dawned in her eyes. She knew this composition, knew it wasn't Massenet, knew exactly whose music was filling the auditorium with its haunting beauty. Eleanor Prescott watched with tears streaming unchecked down her face. Thomas Reeves sat with his head bowed, as if in prayer. And Mr. Harmon, blind but seeing more than most, listened with his entire body, swaying slightly with each phrase his granddaughter had written all those years ago. As the composition neared its conclusion, Amara caught sight of movement at the back of the auditorium. Someone was filming her performance on a phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. Another phone lit up, then another. Within moments, dozens of screens punctuated the darkness like stars, capturing what was no longer just a performance but a reckoning. The final notes of Catherine's composition hung in the air, sustained and pure, before fading into a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. For several heartbeats, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a single person began to applaud. Another joined, then another. The applause spread like wildfire, building to a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. People rose to their feet, their faces illuminated with a mixture of awe and understanding. All except Melanie Crow, who remained seated, her face drained of color. As Amara lowered her bow, Principal Bell approached from the wings, carrying a microphone. His hand trembled slightly as he passed it to her, but his eyes were steady with resolve. Amara had never spoken publicly before. The thought alone had always filled her with dread. But now, as she faced the audience, many still on their feet, their applause finally quieting in anticipation, the words came with surprising clarity. That piece was called Echoes in Silence, she said, her voice soft but clear in the hushed auditorium. It was written by Catherine Harmon 15 years ago, shortly before her death. It was never performed under her name, until tonight. A murmur rippled through the audience. In the front row, Melanie Crowhoff rose from her seat, as if to object, but the superintendent placed a restraining hand on her arm. This violin belonged to Catherine, Amara continued, holding the instrument slightly aloft. Her grandfather gave it to me when someone damaged mine before graduation. He told me to play for those who've been silenced. She paused, her gaze finding Ms. Crow's across the distance that separated them. I think there have been many of us over the years. The murmur grew louder. In the back of the auditorium, a door opened, then closed with a soft thud. Melanie Crow was gone, slipping away through the side exit, while all eyes were fixed on the stage. But it was too late for quiet escapes. Too late for secrets to remain buried. As Amara left the stage to thunderous applause, she knew that what had begun with a single cut violin string had ended with something far more powerful, the truth, finally given voice, through the very music that had been stolen. In the lobby afterward, as audience members pressed around her with congratulations and questions, Amara caught sight of Principal Bell speaking intently with the superintendent. Their expressions were grave, their gestures emphatic. A decision was being made, one that would undoubtedly affect many lives beyond just tonight. Eleanor Prescott appeared at her elbow, elegant even in her emotion. You did it, she said simply. You played for Catherine. For all of them. And as Mr. Harmon approached, guided by a neighbor but walking with newfound purpose, Amara realized that the music she'd just played had never really been silent at all. It had been waiting patient, persistent, for the right moment, the right instrument, the right player to bring it fully to life, just as she had been waiting, all these years, for someone to truly hear her. 1 month after the district showcase, Millstone Middle School stood quiet in the summer heat. Classrooms were empty, hallways vacant, the usual cacophony of adolescent voices replaced by the distant hum of maintenance equipment as janitors prepared the building for the fall semester. In the main office, however, activity continued as administrators processed paperwork, ordered supplies, and addressed the aftermath of what locals had begun calling the Harmon incident. Melanie Crow's office door bore a new nameplate now. Dr. Andrea Winters, music department chair, gleamed in freshly polished brass where Ms. Crow's name had been for over a decade. Inside, boxers still waited to be unpacked, the walls bare except for Dr. Winters' diplomas and a framed photograph of Catherine Harmon placed prominently on the credenza behind her desk. Down the hall, Principal Bell sat across from Superintendent Marshall, their conversation muted but intense. "The internal investigation is complete," Superintendent Marshall said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. 15 years of documented discrimination in scholarship awards, competition selections, and grading. The board is appalled. She removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "We've contacted every student we could identify who was affected. Many have already responded." Principal Bell nodded, his expression grim, and Crow resigned rather than face termination. "Her teaching license is under review by the state board." The superintendent's mouth tightened. "She's claiming she was the victim of a targeted campaign by disgruntled students and colleagues. Apparently, she's already hired an attorney. Will it go to court? Possibly. But she has more to lose than gain by dragging this into the public eye." She tapped the folder, especially given what we found in her personnel files after she left. Detailed notes on students she deemed unsuitable for advanced instruction. "The pattern is ... unmistakable." The weight of those words hung between them. Both educators understood what remained unspoken: how many young lives had been altered by one woman's prejudice, how many talents had gone unrecognized, how many dreams had been quietly extinguished. "And Catherine Harmon's composition?" Principal Bell asked. "The board has unanimously voted to credit her as the composer. We've sent formal notices to every competition, publication, and institution where Crow claimed authorship." Superintendent Marshall's voice softened. "Eleanor Prescott has established a scholarship in Catherine's name for students who demonstrate exceptional musical talent but face ... barriers." Outside, a car pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, an aging Buick with a familiar figure at the wheel. Eleanor Prescott stepped out, immaculate as always in a linen dress despite the summer heat. She was followed by Mr. Harmon, moving carefully with his cane but with a newfound straightness to his shoulders that had been absent before. "They're here for the ceremony," Principal Bell noted, glancing at his watch. "Is everything prepared in the auditorium?" Superintendent Marshall nodded. "The plaque has been installed. Catherine's original scores are displayed in the case beside it, and the state representative will present the official recognition across town." In the small trailer she still shared with her aunt, Amara carefully packed Catherine's violin into its case. The past month had brought changes she could never have anticipated. Interviews with local newspapers, an appearance on a regional morning show, an invitation to perform at the Governor's Arts Education Initiative in Indianapolis. Most meaningful, though, was the letter that had arrived yesterday, bearing the emblem of the prestigious Eastman School of Music. It offered her a full scholarship to their summer intensive program, an opportunity that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "You ready, baby?" Aunt Jessie called from the living room, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The new treatments were working, the doctors said. Not a cure for her COPD, but a reprieve, a chance for more time. "Almost," Amara replied, fingers lingering on the violin case. Beside it lay a small stack of cards and letters, messages from other students who had faced similar discrimination under Ms. Crow's reign, each one thanking Amara for her courage, for playing the music that had finally exposed the truth. The small community center auditorium was nearly full when Amara and her aunt arrived. Familiar faces dotted the crowd: Thomas Reeves and his wife, Principal Bell, Dr. Winters. Several of Amar's classmates who had never spoken to her before the showcase but now offered shy smiles of recognition. Even Rebecca Wilson was there, sitting beside her mother with an expression that hovered between discomfort and something that might, with time, become understanding. At the front of the room, a small stage had been set up. A velvet cloth covered what appeared to be a plaque or sign, waiting to be unveiled. Beside it stood a glass display case containing yellowed sheet music Catherine's original compositions, rescued from boxers in Mr. Harmon's apartment and now preserved for future generations. Eleanor Prescott approached as Amara and her aunt found seats in the front row. "Catherine's mother is here," she murmured, gesturing subtly toward a woman seated near the aisle, the same elderly woman who had approached Amara in the church that day, who had given her the envelope that changed everything. She flew in from Arizona for the ceremony. She hasn't been back to Millstone since Catherine died. Before Amara could respond, Superintendent Marshall stepped to the podium, calling the gathering to order. "We are here today to right a historical wrong," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the small auditorium, "to restore credit where it has long been due, and to honor a young musician whose voice was silenced too soon, but whose music has finally been heard." As she spoke, Amara's attention was drawn to Catherine's mother, her posture ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the covered plaque with an intensity that spoke of years of unresolved grief. "It is my honor to announce the establishment of the Catherine Harmon Memorial Music Library," Superintendent Marshall continued, gesturing toward the display case, "where her original compositions will be preserved and made available to future musicians. Additionally, the Millstone School Board has unanimously voted to rename our district music competition the Catherine Harmon Excellence in Music Award." Mr. Harmon's quiet weeping was audible in the hush that followed this announcement. Eleanor Prescott reached over to clasp his hand, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "And finally," the superintendent said, turning toward Amara, "it is my privilege to introduce the young musician whose courage and talent brought this injustice to light, and who has been invited to perform Catherine's music at the state capitol next month, Amara Ellison." The applause that followed was warm, genuine, so different from the uncertain reception she had faced just weeks ago. As Amara rose and made her way to the stage, violin case in hand, she felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle begun long ago was finally closing. Catherine's mother approached as Amara prepared to play, her steps slow but purposeful. Up close, the resemblance to the photograph in Dr. Winter's office was striking: the same determined chin, the same penetrating gaze. "You play her music as she would have," the woman said simply, her voice rich with emotion. "Thank you for giving her back her voice," Amara nodded, words momentarily failing her. Then she raised Catherine's violin, now officially gifted to her by Mr. Harmon, in a tearful ceremony the week before, and began to play. The notes of echoes in silence filled the auditorium once more, but this time there was no tension, no fear, no sense of revelation, only beauty and remembrance, and the quiet acknowledgement of truths too long denied. As she played the final passage, Amara noticed a small group of younger students watching from the back of the room, children from the elementary school, eyes wide with wonder as they witnessed music's power to transcend time, to speak truth, to honor those who had been forgotten. Afterward, as people mingled during the reception, Superintendent Marshall pulled Amara aside. "The State Music Education Committee called this morning. They want you to perform at their annual ceremony in November, ceremony honoring educators who have made exceptional contributions to musical education." Amara's surprise must have shown on her face, because the superintendent continued with a small smile, "Not just as a performer. They want to include your story in their keynote address about creating more inclusive music education programs across the state." The implications were clear. What had begun as one student's stand against injustice had expanded, rippling outward to affect policy, to change systems, to ensure that what happened to Catherine and to countless others would not be repeated. Later, as the summer twilight settled over Millstone, Amara walked with Mr. Harmon through the small memorial garden that had been planted behind the community center. Catherine's plaque gleamed in the fading light, her name finally restored to its rightful place. "You know," the old luthier said, his blind eyes turned toward the setting sun, "some people believe that music never really dies, that once a note is played, it continues vibrating forever, too faint for us to hear, perhaps, but still moving through the world. touching everything in its path. Amara thought about this as they made their way slowly along the garden path, about notes played and unplayed, about voices silenced and restored, about truth that waits patiently to be heard. Catherine would have liked you, Mr. Harmon continued softly. You both understand that music isn't just about being heard, it's about making others listen, really listen. As they reached the garden gate, Amara turned for one last look at the memorial. The inscription on Catherine's plaque caught the last rays of sunlight, words that seemed to speak not just of one girl's legacy, but of all those who had found their voices against the odds. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They need only vibrate in the silence of those who were never heard. Amara's journey reminds us that sometimes the most profound music comes from those who've been silenced the longest. Her courage to play, Catherine's violin to give voice to truths that powerful people wanted buried, changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who had been deemed unsuitable for opportunity. What would you have done in Amara's position? Would you have had the strength to play that violin when everyone expected you to remain silent? Or would you have accepted the limitations others placed upon you? The most meaningful revolutions often begin with a single note of defiance. One person brave enough to stand in their truth can create ripples that transform entire communities. Amara didn't set out to expose decades of discrimination or to topple a teacher's carefully constructed reputation. She simply wanted to be heard. Yet in finding her own voice, she restored Catherine's legacy and created space for others like her to be recognized for their talents rather than dismissed for their differences. Perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all, that our individual struggles for justice are never truly individual. They're connected across time, across circumstances, across lives. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to light. What moments in your own life have you chosen to speak up when silence would have been easier? Share your reflections in the comments below. And join our community of storytellers and truth seekers who believe that some melodies are too important to remain unheard.